the Indiana Motor Truck Association, and we thank you for joining us today. The IMTA is honored today to be partnering with the National Transportation Consultants and the Indiana State Police Commercial Vehicle Enforcement Division to bring to you this Truckers Against Trafficking informational session. Some housekeeping matters before we begin the session today. Please be sure that your sound is muted and your video off. We have an opportunity to ask questions throughout the session. As Enforcement Officer Hill is presenting, at the end of each section of her presentation, you will see a title slide. At that time, we're happy to take questions. In that thought bubble, if you click that, it will pop up a chat box. You're welcome to direct those questions to me in the two drop-down menu, Kelly Walsh, and I will pose those questions to Enforcement Officer Hill as they are presented. And we will also do a Q&A at the end of the session. A quick update from Indiana related to trafficking. We have legislation currently in play. This is the middle of our session. They're getting ready to switch sides to begin the process again of review of the bills. It passed out early this year unanimously from its first committee meetings. And it is going to, if passed and signed by the governor, it will require CDL training schools to provide the training to the students for trafficking awareness. We did some outreach to the schools in Indiana prior to the legislation being introduced, and we were happy to find that the majority of them already provide this training. So we do feel that it will be successful and come out and be signed by the governor to be put into law beginning of July. At this time, I would like to introduce Enforcement Officer Kimberly Hill with the Indiana State Police Commercial Vehicle Enforcement Division. She is here today as the T.A.T representative to provide us with the session. Kim? The session is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Excuse me. A little bit about myself, Motor Carrier Inspector Kimberly Hill. I've been with the Indiana State Police for 27 years. I've been part of the CVED training team since 2008. In 2010, I received training on human trafficking, and it was eye-opening, and I would even say life-changing. I've been doing my part to help out in the fight against human trafficking by educating as many people as possible through doing similar training programs similar to this one. So our goals for today are to protect our own and to help those that cannot help themselves by being informed about human trafficking. So my hope in sharing this message with each of you today is multifaceted. First, I hope you will think about how you can protect the young people in your own life. Second, hopefully someday the message I share that gets multiplied by each of you will someday make a difference in at least one life. And third, that each of you will carry this message to others and help them become informed about human trafficking. So this is the list of things that we're going to talk about today. During our time together today, we will explore basically the what, where, when, why, and how of human trafficking, ending with what we can do about it. So we will start out with what I usually call human trafficking 101, the basics of human trafficking. It's it's hard to imagine that in 2023 we were talking about slavery. Human trafficking absolutely is modern day slavery. So, while we all like to think that slavery ended with the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th back in the 1860s, but slavery is alive and well today in what we call human trafficking. I'm going to make this comparison a couple times, but I'd like to compare the human trafficking industry to the illegal drug industry. How many times can a quantity of drugs be sold? So if we have whatever quantity of drugs we have, it can be sold once. But when we're talking about a person, that person can be sold time and time again and used to make money for someone else. And I'll refer back to that a couple times today. Next, we will explore the different types of human trafficking. So we have the two basic types: sex trafficking, commercial sex act that is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such act has not attained the age 18 years of age. And then labor trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. And another important term to distinguish while discussing human trafficking is smuggling. Smuggling is illegally transporting persons across international borders. And this often gets confused with human trafficking. Sometimes human trafficking involves smuggling, but not always. In sex trafficking, approximately 83% of victims are U.S. citizens. On the labor trafficking side, 67% of victims are undocumented immigrants. They may have came here on a work visa, but maybe they switch company, switch who they were working for, who they originally got the work visa for, but otherwise they're undocumented immigrants. Let's talk about that comparison to the illegal drug industry again. I was doing a live presentation. I would ask how many of us have a young person in our lives aged. Every presentation I've asked that question, everybody's hand in the room goes up. So hold on to that thought while we continue looking at the next few slides with the facts and statistics. Because I'm sure we all know some young person between the age of 12 and 14. So you can sell that quantity of drugs once, but a human over and over again. A trafficker can make up to $200,000 per year on one sex trafficking victim. Most sex traffickers have 4 to 6 victims. So that's how we get to the human trafficking industry has an estimated annual global worldwide revenue of 150 billion. And that number's been pretty consistent for the time I've been doing human trafficking presentations. But to put that in perspective, that's more than Walt Disney, Coca-Cola, and Starbucks combined revenue for 2021. And those numbers were approximately 140 billion. So it's that number is hard to imagine for me. This slide just shows you how the breakdown in the 150 billion per year industry, how it breaks down. So approximately 99 billion of that is for sexual exploitation. And the other portion of that is the different breakdowns in labor trafficking. So we already said $150 billion industry, 40 million victims worldwide. This number has increased slightly over the last few years. And you'll still find some places, some sites that'll tell you it's 27 million. But I also found multiple places that said to 40 million. So, and the thing about counting the victims is there are so many victims out there that we don't know about. So the 40 million is probably closer to accurate than the 27 million was. A larger percent is in labor trafficking, although it's not quite, as we saw from the last slide, it's not quite as profitable. 50% of the victims are children and 80% of the victims are female. And 99% of sex trafficking victims are women and children. And then we have that 12 to 14 years of age is the average age of entry into sex trafficking. So if that's the average, that means there's many that are lower than that. Can you imagine those young people in our lives, 12 to 14 years of age, being enslaved into the sex trafficking industry? This is the stat that hit so hard when I started doing human trafficking presentations, and I still feel a bit emotional about that when I come to that statistic every time. Another staggering statistic is that 1 in 6 children who are in one of the at-risk populations listed on the left part of the screen, 1 in 6 will likely become a victim of child sex trafficking. So in those at-risk children, they don't have the best home life, I'm guessing, in many cases. And so they're looking for a bright light, I guess. And then they get caught up in sex trafficking. And 1/3 of teens that are on the street will be lured into prostitution within 48 hours of leaving home. So they run away, whether they're running away from their biological family or from a foster family. And then that puts them at an even greater risk when they're that runaway, because they're wondering where their next meal's coming from and where they're going to sleep tonight. These numbers also just hit you right in the gut. 42% trafficked by a family member. Not that I want you to do it right now, but after this presentation, Google mom or parent trafficking a child for drugs or rent, or you fill in the blank. It happens every day. Another common way people get trafficked is by thinking they're entering a relationship with someone. So they're lured into what looks like a boyfriend girlfriend kind of relationship, only to find out that now they're being enslaved into the sex trafficking industry. And then every spring, it's more on the labor trafficking side, but every spring we see signs pop up everywhere for modeling jobs, summer work. No company name, no job location, just a phone number. And every time I see these signs, I wonder, is it recruiting for labor trafficking or even sex trafficking? See, you may think that you're applying for a legitimate job or calling about a legitimate job, and then you find yourself in being labor trafficked. I debated, this slide's been part of my presentation ever since I started doing human trafficking presentations. And I debated on where to put it, and I decided to put it near the at-risk kids after we got done talking about the at-risk kids. Because many of us know troubled youth in our community, in our church, in our family. These kids are the most vulnerable. They are the ones we need to watch out for, to help, hopefully to keep them from becoming involved in human trafficking, or even more, to help them out when they do fall victim to traffickers. Despite how easily society is willing to discard these young people. You know, so maybe they started out as a bad or troubled kid, maybe probably as no fault of their own, they ended up in the foster care system. And now they're vulnerable to trafficking. The trafficker preys on them, and we need to, be looking for these victims and trying to help them out. Just think about the top 25 in reported human trafficking cases in the United States. Where do you think those are? Seems logical along the east and west coast. Maybe the southern border. Many of us would probably think the Midwest is probably not in a hotbed for human trafficking cases. It's not easy to imagine human trafficking happening in our own backyard. It's easier to think it's happening somewhere else, in heavily populated areas, or maybe even popular tourist destinations. But human trafficking is alive and well in our own backyard. Many of our neighboring states are in the top 10. All of our neighboring states are in the top 25. The Midwest is alive and well in human trafficking. We expect California and Texas and probably Florida and probably New York to be there, but it's a little more difficult to wrap our head around that Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, and Missouri are also in that top 10. Okay, when I first started doing human trafficking presentations, I set up a Google alert for human trafficking in the news. So for over 10 years now, I've been getting almost daily alerts about human trafficking in the news. Sometimes it's good news, like new or stricter human trafficking laws or more beneficial services for victims. But all too often, it's another case of human trafficking, often involving people in positions of trust: parents, foster parents, teachers, pastors, law enforcement, other first responders, with victims way younger than the average age of 12 to 14, which is bad enough. So I pulled a few examples to take a look at. So this was a human trafficking ring that was being operated out of a child and senior care, possibly hundreds of victims. This is a quote from Jade, who was human trafficked, who's in labor trafficking. And this quote blew me away. She's now employed as a certified nursing assistant in a nursing home. But before coming to the U.S. for work, Jade and her coworker worked in Iraq, and they say their workspace was destroyed by a suicide bomber in Iraq, but would still choose that workspace in Iraq over their experience in labor trafficking. This company was forcing minors to work at the business of detailing cars as well as clerical duties without paying them. In that second paragraph, what I have highlighted there, many of these young people were under their care as foster parents. The FBI does these cross-country human trafficking details frequently. The one from August of 2022, this was an article out of the St. Louis area, and there were 141 adult victims of human trafficking. Fortunately, they arrested 85 suspects. The average age of victims was 15 and a half years old. The youngest victim was 11. This is a 2015 case, but I like to use it because there are so many details that we don't even think about as being part of labor trafficking. And it's actually one of the most detailed cases I can be able to share outside of the law enforcement circles. It outlines what debt bondage looks like. These were contract workers doing chores, including cleaning cages, debeaking chickens at the egg farm. The workers were supervised on site by the same people who were running the trafficking ring. So the other people who were legitimately working at the egg farm rarely came in contact with these trafficking victims. The court records show that the teenagers who refused to work or ask questions would be told that they or their parents would be killed if they refused to work. This was discovered by a tip that the egg farm was smuggling people into work. They were working for a contractor of the egg farm. And it took the FBI several years before they were able to piece this all together and go in and rescue these victims. But so from the trucking aspect, do you think the truck drivers may have seen some of these victims when picking up or delivering at the egg farm? Do you think that's possible? I do. So I don't want to read the whole slide to you, but so workers earned approximately $500 a week, but they had to give everything except for $20 to their traffickers. And the other part of this that blows me away is that the families of these workers provided money and property to the traffickers, thinking they were providing a way for the American dream for these young people by getting them to the US. Do we have any questions so far? So what's some of the language that's used in when we're talking about human trafficking? So the recruiter is the one that gains the victim's trust and then sells them for labor or to a pimp or to the trafficker. Sometimes this is that boyfriend, the neighbor, family member. Remember my earlier comment about parents trafficking their children to help pay for the rent money or to buy their drugs, which happens all too often. Then the trafficker is the one who's doing the controlling, making the victims fearful through abuse, threats, and lies. They gain power over their victim. The victim could be anyone. I've spent quite a bit of time talking about the at-risk kids, but they're not the only ones who are in danger of becoming trafficked. And then the consumer is the one who funds the human trafficking industry by purchasing goods and services. Often, we as consumers are unaware that someone is suffering, or that this was used to make our product. But without the consumer, then there is no money coming in for the trafficking industry. So we've talked about the at-risk youth and the runaway youth, but even in a stable home environment, what 12 to 14 or even older teenager doesn't think that the grass is greener somewhere else than it is at home? Doesn't think that somebody else will whether love them more or love them more the way they think they ought to be loved. They're constantly looking for that attention. I remember putting this slide together when I originally started using it in my presentations, and I started out with that a need to be loved was near the bottom of the list, and I moved it up to the top because that's the bottom line. These kids that become vulnerable to these traffickers are in that position because a need to be loved. So this, that's one way, that we should spoil those 12 to 14-year-old kids in our lives, but make them feel loved and welcome at home, and so that they're not looking for it somewhere else. How are people recruited? So it's, like I said, when we talked about the geographic part of this, it's easy to imagine that this is happening in heavily populated areas, popular tourist attractions on the east and west coast, but it's sort of hard to imagine that it's happening in our own backyards. But the internet and social media make that a reality, because that brings that right to our backyards, right inside our homes. Fake employment agencies, like I mentioned, all the yard signs that pop up in the spring. Acquaintances or family members. Sometimes it does happen by abduction, where they've been kidnapped and then they're put into this life. But 46% of the time, they are known to each other some way. Almost half. Too quick. 27% of sex trafficking cases reported to the National Human Trafficking Hotline in 2018 of being trafficked by a family member. And worldwide, the Counter Trafficking Data Collective reported that 41% of child trafficking involved a close member or a relative of the child as a perpetrator. So it's easy online and social media for traffickers to see kids that are down on their luck, or having a fight with their parent, or fighting with their boyfriend, or all those different things that get posted to. Traffickers prey on that. So, with my first goal being to protect our own, this is where it has to start. um, protecting and making kids aware of how dangerous the internet is, even though they think they know it all, and they think they're smarter than all of us adults. I get that. But as parents, those social media interactions need to be monitored. So providing any kind of information about difficulties at home, gives that trafficker a way in, a crack in the shell. So in 2019, in Decatur County, there was a child abduction, but it was later discovered that the child met the trafficker through a social media interaction. And then, similar to, like the FBI cross country thing that they do, work project set up a fake Instagram account with an 11-year-old girl. So, and within the first 2 minutes, within the first minute, 2 messages from unknown adult men came in. So it doesn't take long for these kids to get preyed on online. So, take a few minutes to, talk to the young people in your life, whether it's your kids, your grandkids, nieces and nephews, about those social media interactions and how dangerous they are. Well, it's often thought that, the trucking industry is likely to come in contact with human trafficking industry through sex trafficking at truck stops and rest areas. I think labor trafficking is also places where truck drivers get to go behind the scenes where the rest of the general public does not. Whether they're delivering to these businesses, and often it's not the actual business that's doing the trafficking. It's often a contractor that says, I'll do this job for you, and they bring in the trafficking victims to do the work. So there's all kinds of industries where labor trafficking happens every day. Two-thirds of labor traffickers are male. So the actual people doing the labor trafficking, those typically, or two-thirds of the time, that's a male. Most of those males were in their 30s or 40s. And about half were US citizens and half were non-citizens. But obviously this varies across the industries. In agricultural cases, 82% of suspects were US citizens. That one sort of surprised me. This is probably the hardest thing to understand. If we've never been in this situation, why don't these people try to get out? So many are afraid of being deported. They came here on a legitimate work visa, but now they're not working for who they came here to work for. They end up in a traffic situation. They have a huge fear of being deported. That they may be in danger, that their family may be in danger. And then the psychological and physiological hold on them is similar to an abuse situation, where they feel a connection to their trafficker. Many worry about where their next meal is coming from, where the roof over their head's going to come from if they try to leave. So many will not complain about their situation. Many are fearful to reach out for help. So we have a responsibility, if we see something, to say something and try to get them help. Even for the undocumented immigrants, there's visas available to help these folks.
Kim? We have a couple of questions from the group.
Okay.
First question. If something was presented to me that could be questioned as a possible human trafficking situation, how do we report it? Will you be addressing that later or?
Yes, I will be addressing that later on towards the end of the presentation.
And another question from the audience, is there an international hand sign or gesture that a victim could use to signal help without speaking?
And I will also be addressing that one later as well.
Okay, so we will get the answers to those two questions near the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. Keep them coming in. And we will have a question and answer session at the end. So, but feel free to type them in as we go. These were the pictures there are actual tattoos from trafficking victims. Especially the sex traffickers, but not just the sex traffickers, but probably more prevalently the sex traffickers. They want to label their commodity, so they put their own label on their victims. Very often the trafficker will have a matching tattoo or a matching brand. Um, one of the training that I was able to attend was a law enforcement training. And we actually had a human trafficking victim come speak to us. Bar none, the most, I don't know, the best training I've ever had in my 27 years of being around law enforcement. But the abuse that she suffered that almost killed her as at the hands of her traffickers was unimaginable. The last one there, Stockholm syndrome, is where that's where they have the I'm at a loss for words there. The psychological tie to their trafficker. Whether it's that boyfriend girlfriend relationship that they think may finally work out, or just fear of everybody else, but loyalty. That's the word I was looking for. Loyalty to the trafficker. And some other indicators that are more specific to labor trafficking. Long hours. Think back to the egg farm example and how many of these probably pertain. Is the victim residing in housing provided by the trafficker, or maybe even within the workplace? Are they able to freely come and go? And then that last one, threatened with harm to themselves or to their family. On the egg farm story, there was they were threatened that if they didn't work, that either they would be killed or their family would be killed. Okay, Truckers Against Trafficking, or TAT. I can't say enough good about what these people are doing. About the same time I became involved with human trafficking, Truckers Against Trafficking was getting their start somewhere, I think in the neighborhood of 2008, 2009. And, you know, they recognize that the trucking industry is the eyes and ears of the country. You know, and they get behind the scenes and are able to see things that the general public doesn't see. You know, whether that's when they're pulling into the egg farm to pick up or deliver, um, or they're parked at the truck stop, or they're parked at the rest area. Um, so to date, Truckers Against Trafficking has trained 1.5 million professionals that are involved in the trucking industry with their human trafficking training. um, and then the National Human Trafficking Hotline reported that in the last 5 years, over 41% of the cases that truckers and those in the trucking industry have reported to them involve victims that are minors. So through this educational process that Truckers Against Trafficking has started, there have been a number of youth that have been rescued out of the human trafficking industry. So, you know, at the beginning, I want us to be able to protect our own, but I also want you, as in the trucking industry, be able to pass this on to others. And Truckers Against Trafficking has some incredible training, and they keep broadening their horizon. This is just a small sample of the trainings, the different trainings that they provide on their website, and I got a couple links there. So they've specialized their training towards the busing industry, the school bus industry, local drivers, people providing household good mover services. So there's a lot of specific training. The other one that's not listed there is the energy sector. So like the pipelines and the other utility companies. But they are doing a fabulous job. And even if you're not in the busing industry, go watch the Busing on the Lookout video. It has Annika's story. Annika was the survivor that did our law enforcement training, and as you can see, it still brings up a lot of emotions. This is just one story. TAT has several of these on their website. I sort of had to look around to find. I knew they were there. I had to dig around to find them. But if you look, I have the website at the bottom there. So it's their website, and then you're looking for Making an Impact. And this is just one of the stories from the trucking industry. And the trucking industry is making incredible progress in this area. And they're instrumental in the fight against human trafficking. Probably looking at this slide and thinking, oh my gosh, not another app. But probably the best thing I can tell you, this app is very beneficial, and no annoying notifications. So it's on my phone. It doesn't beep or alert or tell me anything, but it's there if I need it. I can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline directly from this app, where it says report activity. You click on that and it prompts your phone to dial up the human trafficking hotline. It also has multiple resources on what red flags and indicators, and it includes information on what kind of information you need to provide if you're going to try to make a report on what you think may be human trafficking. So it's an awesome app. If you need it, it's there. It's not going to bug you to let you know that it's still there. So, and all their videos. So the training videos that I just pointed to, and then there's some other videos where the drivers who have made discoveries or reported activity of human trafficking share their stories. Those are there as well. And you can control it, whether you only watch videos on Wi-Fi or whatever. It prompts you to let you know before you watch a video that it may take up a lot of data. So that's also a good thing. So definitely encourage everybody to put that app on their phone. And then we're going to talk more about the human trafficking hotline here in a second. So what to do, who to call? Do we have any questions before we go forward? Okay, I'm seeing no questions. All right. So the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and their number is 888-373-7888. There's also the Indiana Child Abuse and Neglect phone number there on the screen. I'm going to pause here for, if you have any questions, type those in the chat, but take a few minutes to put at least that top number in your phone. And then keep in mind, I'll tell you a little bit about what the human trafficking hotline can do. So if you see something, but nobody's in immediate danger, then the human trafficking hotline can be where you start. If somebody is in immediate danger, then I would call 911 always in that situation. But if you're not sure and you want the situation investigated and checked out, the human trafficking hotline can orchestrate that. If somebody is in immediate danger, when you get off the phone with 911, then call the human trafficking hotline, because then they can work to help get victim services lined up and what's available in that area. So that they're ready for the situation if it unfolds quickly. So 911 if somebody's in immediate danger. I'd still call the human trafficking hotline either way. If you're not sure what you're seeing, the human trafficking hotline is the way to go. They can check it out. They have resources in every state. Whether they're dealing with local law enforcement, state law enforcement, or the FBI, they can get it investigated. So, okay, before I move forward, does everybody have 888-373-7888 in their cell phone? That's the human trafficking hotline. All right, and then that hand signal for help. So it's made with the palm facing outward, and then they tuck the thumb, and then they bend bend the fingers down and trap the thumb. And they may do this repeatedly to alert you that something's not right. This is a domestic violence signal I'm not exactly sure. I know I've seen it a lot online, that it's been shared around frequently. But in 2021, there was a situation where a Kentucky driver called 911 and alerted the authorities that a female passenger in a car traveling southbound on I-75 was using a hand gesture that indicates violence at home and appeared to be in distress. And so police were able to pull over the car and learned that the juvenile female passenger had been reported missing from Asheville, North Carolina 2 days earlier by her parents. So they were able to get her the help that she needed. Okay. Just some general resources. Many of these were used to put together this presentation. There's project is where a lot of the statistics came from. Human Trafficking Hotline has a webpage as well. Truckers Against Trafficking, I can't say enough about their website, their program, their app. And, when we first started, I asked you to share this with others. And so if you got people in your circle, in your family that are in other industries that you think may also be in contact with trafficking victims. The Department of Homeland Security Blue Campaign, which is the top website, has resources for all kinds of industries. And how trafficking may look in the various industries, from medical to education to other forms of travel, airline travel, train travel. The Department of Homeland Security does a good job of addressing those other industries. Okay, and now I will open it up for questions. So send your questions through the chat.
We have a question.
Okay.
Obviously, there's a huge demand out there for this type of horrendous activity. Aside from what you've mentioned in regards to some of the cases you've referenced, can you talk in general about what is being done on the other side of this issue to find and prosecute the criminals?
The prosecution is tough. And very often it becomes the focus becomes rescuing the victims, which obviously is priority number one, getting them the help they need. Prosecution is tough because a lot of times the victims aren't willing to face their traffickers in court. So then that makes it more difficult to prosecute. So that's part of it. In recent years, many states and federally, the laws have been made more stringent, so that has helped. Some of these laws have included beefing up the services that are available for victims. But rescuing the victims is priority number one. And I know that the prosecution is tough. So, but if the case comes together, then they will prosecute. But if goal number one is rescuing the victims.
Yeah. And I think rescuing the victims, raising the awareness like we are. You mentioned one of the stories about the gal that came to the trucker's door And he thought after she might be in trouble, watched her go to other truck drivers' doors. They turned her away also and watched her get in her person's car. That right there, we're doing away in that situation with clients. We can do away with the clients. We can stop it.
Yep, especially sex trafficking. You know, it's not always so easy to see what products we as consumers are purchasing that before that product gets to us involve trafficking, labor trafficking of some sort. You know, but on the sex trafficking industry, there, you know, no doubt that if we get rid of that need, then sex trafficking goes away.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Seeing no other questions at this time, Kim, I want to thank you for your time and all of the information you shared. It was a good presentation. It was information we need to know. And you know, you hate to say a good presentation in combination with what the topic was about, but it's information we need to know. And for you being out there and sharing it, we thank you for that today. I want to thank also the National Transportation Consultants Group for hosting us here. All of you for joining us on the webinar. We have recorded the session, and that will be shared out later this week from NTCI. And as an IMTA, or as the State Trucking Association for Indiana, and those of you that aren't members but might perhaps be here in the state, June 9th, we have our next Safety and Maintenance Council meeting. It's going to be in Carmel at Assured Partners. It is a lunchtime meeting. You can find the information on our website at www.intrucking.org. And the two topics are going to be looking at ways to reduce cost in fleet operations and what needs to be in your truck binder when your driver's pulled over for a roadside inspection. What does he need to have ready to hand to the officer and in what format that can be in? So if you'd like to attend, feel free to sign up and register. And in the meantime, thank you for participating. Oh, we have another question. That would happen if I told you. Is there a certain demographic of people who are acquiring these services?
I can't answer that. I did not look that stat up, but I'm sure if you reach out to Google, you'll find your information or whatever your preferred search engine is. If you start looking and doing your own research on human trafficking, just over the internet, all the statistics and stuff are just mind-boggling and gut-wrenching. But I don't have that one.
When we share the video, we can share the link to the Truckers Against Trafficking website where they can look and watch and maybe sign up for the newsletter as well. I just received a newsletter yesterday that talked about a rescue situation. So those are things that give you hope. And again, with no other questions posted at this time, Kim, thank you.
All right.
Thank you all for joining us, and everybody have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.